Greetings, everyone, and welcome to my new channel, TheoLayman. My name is AJ Mittendorf. If you are familiar with that name, it's probably because you are familiar with my other channel called Poetry Revival. This is a channel that I'm starting today based on ideas that are Bible-based. And I'm not talking about the Bible as a work of literature, but as a work of Scripture, of God's revealed Word. I am, in fact, a born-again, Bible-believing, God-fearing, Jesus-preaching Christian. I believe in the gospel as recorded in Scripture. Repent of your sins, believe in Jesus as God who came to earth in the flesh of a man, lived a perfect, sinless life, offered himself as the Passover sacrifice, becoming our sin, and receiving on himself the punishment that we are due. And he died as we all should. Then on the third day he rose from the dead because he is God, and he now intercedes to God the Father on our behalf while seated at the Father's right hand. Just for the sake of full disclosure, I need you to understand that I am not a theologian or a pastor. I am a pure, unadulterated layman, hence the name of the channel. On this channel, I want to discuss a variety of Bible-based topics. God, Jesus, the Son of God, and all those glorious topics that apply. Salvation, heaven, eternity, the rapture, and on and on and on. As far as the name of the channel goes, I just now pronounced it TheoLayman in this introduction, but you can pronounce it however you want. I figure that there are about two ways of pronouncing it. You can pronounce it with the same rhythm as the word Theophilus from the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts. So TheoLayman, if you wish. Or you can pronounce it with the same rhythm as theologian, so TheoLayman. Either one of those is just fine. I emphasized TheoLayman in the introduction here just to emphasize the idea of it being a layman, but I actually quite like the sound of TheoLayman. It sounds like a person's name in Greek. If you like this first episode of this new channel that I'm doing here, I want you to know this comes from an article that I wrote, and I didn't know what to do with it, and that's why I started the channel. I have two different PDF copies of this article in the description, God willing, if I can figure out how to do that. The first PDF will be in the same format that I'm doing for the show. It's a two-part block format is what they call it, where I talk first on one topic and all its characteristics, and then I do the second topic and all the characteristics. That's a block format, and I do that simply because this is going to be a long episode, and I wanted to be able to break it into 2 points. The other PDF copy will be a point-by-point, where I talk about one characteristic and then the two comparing components, and then another characteristic, and then how it applies to the two compared components. Both will be available as a PDF in the description, providing I know how to do that and I'm able to do that. This first episode is called The Revealed God, a God we know because he has been revealed to us, not because of our inventing him. This is part 1, and it is called The Gods of the Nations, Augmented Humans. When a group of humans creates a god for themselves, that being is made in the image of the folks who conjured him. Even when people of various cultures try to incorporate Christianity, they often attempt to recreate Christ himself as one from their own culture. As Caucasians seem to prefer a Caucasian Christ, so African cultures favor an African Christ. Asian cultures opt for an Asian Christ. And other cultures opt for a Christ that reflects their culture as well. Christ was a Jew. Now, compared with people of most Middle Eastern cultures, he was likely fairly complected. Yet he was not European. Ergo, he was also not Caucasian. But neither was he African or Asian. It's interesting to note that whether creating or recreating God, humanity creates him in humanity's image. The previous examples represent reimaginings of a foreign deity, and I don't regard them highly for this article. Rather, the gods that are Entirely the creations of their respective cultures are my focus because these gods share specific characteristics across cultures and across time, across the board, even while being elevated renderings of the people who created them. Thus, this essay opens with an exploration, a survey of the common characteristics of some better-known pantheons created by some of humanity's more prominent cultures in the first half. It is not an artistic interpretation of the wooden carvings, the marble sculptures, or the bronze castings, nor is it a critique of the paintings, mosaics, or tapestries. It is an examination of the lore behind those gods, their origins, their domains, and their lives. Then, in the second part, I will compare those features with the biblical God in order to demonstrate that humanity is utterly incapable of having created, originated, or conjured the God of the Bible, even by the mightiest of human imaginations. It cannot be done. Before I discuss the specific human characteristics of man-made gods, I need to point out two discrete but unified reasons those gods are so very human. This is conjecture on my part. The first is that the human imagination, as something utterly finite, is simply unable to conceive of anything more significant than humanity. We are, after all, at the top of every conceivable food chain, not for our horns or claws or teeth or brute strength, but for our relative superior intelligence. We outthink, ergo we are superior. And we are superior, ergo we are like God or the gods, as the case may be. But since we are also painfully aware of our limitations, we justify those failings in our concoctions of gods. In essence, since we can imagine nothing greater than humanity, humanity becomes our gods, replete with human frailties and foibles. The second reason, the yang of the first reason's yin, follows very smoothly. Humans can imagine nothing greater than humanity, so we decide that humanity is greater than it is. Creating gods in our image appeals to our collective egos. These two causes create a balanced contrast, determining that neither cause is the sole cause, but that both are true. Both are the cause. Artificial gods are just like people because we see ourselves as significant. But those artificial gods have human faults because we are our model for these anthropomorphized, self-aggrandizing deities. Telling stories about Zeus or Odin becomes a matter of what would I do, rather than the famous slogan, what would Jesus do? It is, in essence, the ultimate form of self-worship. We are legends in our own minds, if you'll please pardon the cliche. And it is, perhaps, part of the fulfillment of the serpent's promise in the Garden of Eden. You will be like God. So, if these artificial gods are created in humanity's image, what are some of the specific characteristics we share with these expanded humans? After all, while these gods may have originated in various cultures, humanity is still the model for their conception, and humanity is a very limited source of inspiration for creating something as grand as deities. Ergo, all these gods must have certain features in common. To begin, artificial gods are little more than human beings with superhuman capabilities, like ESP, and equally as fictitious. That is to say, the gods human cultures create for themselves to worship have only human capabilities, but those capabilities are enhanced. So, while they are far stronger than the average Joe or Josephine, they are still limited to the 5 senses. Those senses are simply greater. They hear better, see more, and may have a more extensive knowledge base. But the implication remains that they are limited. In essence, Superman is one of these gods with his X-ray vision, super hearing, and knowledge spanning the galaxy. But where there are heightened strengths, there are also enhanced flaws. They have petty disagreements, are prone to childish whims, and are greedily venal. They are selfish, arrogant, vain, and ultimately weak. The Norse god Odin, for example, famously lacks his right eye. He sacrificed it in exchange for the knowledge of the wisdom of the cosmos. Now, while the defect may give him character, it ends up showing considerable humanesque weakness, to wit, physical frailty and a lack of human wisdom and knowledge. Or consider Hera, Aphrodite, and Athena, the three Greek goddesses who narcissistically demand to be awarded the golden apple of discord with its inscribed title, "For the fairest." They engage in petty bickering and egotistical squabbling regarding an item designed to draw out from them the very discord that is already part of their nature. As mere enhanced humans, these gods often visit us standard humans face to face, according to the stories. Zeus selected the character Paris, the man from Troy, for example, to judge who was to be the fairest among Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. That is, he was to judge who among these three goddesses was the fairest, awarding the victor the apple of discord. In doing so, these goddesses appeared to Paris, quote, "in their full glory," end quote, with all that that implies, and its strongest implication is nudity, and little more, because, as the tale is rendered, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, along with Hermes, appear as people with skin and hair and everything that people have, but the three goddesses are without clothing. There are myriad examples, especially in Greco-Roman mythology, of people standing eye to eye with gods who appear in their own versions of their full glory, even though at other times they will also disguise themselves as animals, given the proper whim, which is usually a whim of a sexual nature. So, while more powerful, these pseudo-deities are little more than men and women with amazing talents for making lifelike costumes. Like men who are in positions of power, these gods are lustful. Odin and Zeus, who's also known as Jupiter, have affairs with any number of gods and mortals, males and females, of age and underage. First, in the form of a swan, Zeus impregnates a young woman named Leda while she is bathing in a river. She ultimately gives birth to 2 eggs with 2 offspring in each, 2 mortal in one egg and 2 demigod in the other. It's complicated. Next, in the form of a rain cloud and rain of golden flakes, he impregnates Danae, who ultimately gives birth to Perseus. Then, as an eagle, he abducts the young boy Ganymede for sexual purposes, and for similar purposes, he takes on the form of a white bull to kidnap Europa, a young girl. The list goes on, and 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 on. Furthermore, according to Wayland Skalsgrism, author of Odin's Way in the Modern World, Odin from Norse mythology is known as the god of sex, often bragging to his many offspring of his innumerable sexual exploits. More on this subject could be said of Odin. As Odin and Zeus are both kings in their respective demi-divine domains, there seems to be nothing to be done to curb their extramarital indulgences, and they are not alone in their happiness of pursuit. Other gods in both domains are equally aggressively virile, even as the respective, though not necessarily respectful, goddesses are more than humanly fertile. Another detail that shows that these imitative gods are only little more than superhuman beings or augmented mortals is evident in how they look. They appear either as people with little or no variation from the culture that created them, or as people with sundry variations of standard humanity, or as people-animal hybrids. To begin, the Greco-Roman and Norse gods all appear as people. They are depicted as such in the sculptures or two-dimensional renderings. even when they have not taken any human disguises, their visages are nothing more than those of people. This principle is not limited to images from our time, but hails from ancient times as well. Whether rendered in their literature, sculpture, or paintings, the gods of these cultures are represented as nothing more than humans in their aspects. Human gods, such as Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, who are also often presented together, appear as humans with an array of variations, frequently multiple arms, but sometimes also multiple heads or faces. Whether these unique qualities are to be regarded as some combinations of creatures, such as humans and animals, or as symbolic suggestions of superhuman powers, I shall leave for my listeners to decide. But the point remains that decidedly human origins inspire them. And what part of them is not from human origins is still inspired by decidedly earthly beings. The gods of China and Egypt are only moderately different, inspired by hybrids of people and animals. For example, the ancient Chinese worship the god Fuxi, who has the head of a man and the body of a snake, as does his twin sister Nuwa. I think that's how you say that, except that she has the head of a woman. There are other similarly conceived gods of ancient China. Egypt is well known for its hybrid deities, and they are reasonably consistent. While Isis and Osiris are depicted entirely with human anatomy but with oddly colored skin, usually a blue or a purple, most Egyptian gods have the bodies of people with the heads of animals. Ra, for example, had the head of a falcon. Horus had the head of a hawk. Thoth had the head of an ibis, which is another bird. Anubis, a god, had the head of a jackal, which is a dog or a coyote type of animal. While Bastet and Tefnut, both goddesses, had heads of cats, the small cat and a lioness respectively. Other animals decapitated for Egyptian gods include the crocodile for Sobek, the hippo for Taweret, the ram for Khnum, and nobody knows what beast lost its head for Set. Eventually, the Egyptians shook things up by flipping the formula for the Sphinx, which has a person's head and a lion's body. And there's also the occasional mismatch, such as the demon Amut, which has parts crocodile, lioness, and hippopotamus. These animals were the three largest and most common man-eating predators known in ancient Egypt culture, which might explain Amut's status as a demon. But whatever culture or origin, the physique of each god starts as a human and then is given variations based on the culture's design, what looks right or good, what is appropriately symbolic, or what offers the most likely tone for a given deity. In any case, however, there is nothing extraordinary about any of them. They are all made from creatures of earthly origin. While man-made gods are often composite beings, animals and people in appearance, they have power over only a single small portion of creation, even as people are also in charge of only certain parts of a multi-person task. Whether we are talking about Greco-Roman, Norse, Egyptian, Hindu, or gods from anywhere else, if the god in question is not the father of gods such as Zeus or the mother of gods such as Isis, then a god is the god of some minute part of creation. Thor, for example, is the god of thunder. The words thunder and Thor share common roots, as a matter of fact. He's also the god of lightning and storms, among other things. Athena in Greek mythology is the goddess of wisdom. Anubis in Egypt is the god of death and embalming. Shanji in China is the goddess of the moon. And Vishnu, in Hindu, is the god of love, benevolence, and forgiveness. Each god has his or her own realm of influence or area of authority or expertise. Even a culture's father or mother god does not have power over all domains. That is to say, god kings or queens have not divided their powers among their other deities, their children and their cohorts and all that kind of stuff, but they are equally limited with all the other gods in their pantheon. For example, Zeus must bow in some areas to the power of the Fates. He'll swear oaths by the river Styx, and he avoids angering the godchild, Cupid, lest he, meaning Zeus, would fall victim to the god's arrows of love. So, since all these gods are indeed superhuman, they are all, like their terrestrial counterparts, very limited in their super, emphasizing their humanity over their divinity, even while that humanity remains fictitious. While discussing the limitations of the power of these deities, I might as well emphasize the most significant limitation of them all. These beings all have backstories from which we learn their origins, or theogony, and in some cases we learn of their births. That is to say, these gods all share with humanity the subjugation to time. In ancient Chinese mythology, the god Pangu, of whom the Scottish missionary to Hong Kong said, Pangu is spoken of by the common people as the first man who opened up heaven and earth. In Taoist picture books, I have seen him as shaggy, dwarfish, and wielding a massive hammer and chisel with which he is breaking the chaotic rocks. Pangu is said to be the first living being born from an egg that contained the entire universe. So his birth is also the birth of creation, after which, according to the myth, Pangu creates the world. Theogonies are not limited to a single culture, but are consistent among all cultures that have invented their deities. It's even a large part of Greco-Roman mythology. By the time Zeus's name is changed to Jupiter and he's become a Roman god, he is so well established that his entire lineage is established. Zeus is the son of Kronos, or Saturn, who is the son of Uranos, or Uranus, as we may know him, who seems to have origins that are apparently sketchy. It is, for example, unclear if Gaia, or Earth, is Uranos's wife or mother. But the point is that Uranos, Kronos, and Zeus all have beginnings, and even Kronos is fathered by chaos. The god Fuxi in China is said to be humanity's first ancestor. He was conceived with his twin sister Nuwa after their mother stepped into a footprint made by the god Lei Gong, the Chinese counterpart of Thor. They are both the god of thunder. Similarly, the Hindu god Brahma was either born from a golden egg or from a lotus that sprang from the navel of Vishnu. It depends on which story you refer to, but he has an origin. So these fictitious gods all embody the idea of being mere superhumans who are subject to time. They were all born, they are all finite, they are limited. But not only are these gods subject to time as evidenced by their births, but also by their aging and deaths. For example, Kronos and Uranos both have forms of death. Fearing revolt from his offspring, for example, Kronos consumes his offspring, and he swallows them. Rhea, however, saves the youngest child, Zeus, by concealing him on Mount Ida. When he matures, Zeus that is, he saves his older siblings from the belly of Kronos and confines him to Tartarus, which is the Greek equivalent of the biblical concept of hell that is referred to as the second death in the Bible. Prior to that, Uranos, who was a crueler ruler, finds himself at the mercy of his son Kronos, who emasculates him and confines him also to Tartarus. So, since both Kronos and Uranos suffer a form of death, we can assume that such a trait, that of death, is one that Zeus inherits, as will also his offspring. Even in Hindu beliefs, the gods are not without their deaths and consequences of age. For example, Brahma is depicted as having 4 faces, each with a white beard, indicating his great age and wisdom. Ergo, in order to gain wisdom, this Hindu god must have great age, which implies that he must have learned wisdom, which, in turn, re-emphasizes the fact that Brahma, among other Hindu gods, is also limited by time. He has an origin, and he is old. Similarly, in Norse mythology, Odin, the counterpart of Zeus or Jupiter, is the son of Bor and Bestia, and he has 2 brothers, which indicates that he too has been born. He is also depicted as being elderly, so he ages. Furthermore, he had to offer his right eye to obtain wisdom from Mirmir's well beside Yggdrasil, which is a tree, an immense ash tree that connects the 9 worlds, or, if you watch the movies, the 9 realms. The water from this well gives the wisdom of creation, meaning that Odin also required age and learning to have wisdom. Finally, Odin was one of 3 gods, Odin, Vili, and Ve, who attacked and defeated Ymir, the ancestor of all gods. That suggests that he, Odin, is part of a race of beings, all of whom were born, age, and die. All these gods and goddesses have appearance like those of humans or with some variation thereof. They are all granted origin stories, rendering them subjects to time, which implies that while each is either born, hatched, or spontaneously created, each will suffer his or her demise. Furthermore, they are, in reality, fictitious people with exaggerated human abilities, yet each has power over a single part of creation. A final component that all these gods and goddesses share is that they are all parts of polytheistic systems. Polytheism is the belief in many gods, and it seems true that part of the limitations of the human imagination is the difficulty of conceiving a single god who, quote, can do it all, end quote. I submit that people create polytheism because it more closely reflects humanity. But polytheism also seems part of glorifying humanity to the divine level. That is to say, the adage, many hands make light work, seems to apply to the invention of religion because it applies to humanity. Ergo, it must apply to the gods. However, when you consider the rarity of monotheism, it seems unlikely that the belief in only one all-powerful God has anything to do with human imagination. According to Theodorus P. van Baren, the professor of science of religions at the State University of Groningen in the Netherlands, there are a mere 3 monotheistic systems worldwide. 3. Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. But when you look over all cultures, currently and historically, there are and have been hundreds of polytheistic religions, not including each variation or the sundry sects of the main religions. However, with all due respect to Dr. Van Baren, I would add evolution to the list of monotheistic religions for a total of 4. But consider this. Judaism was the first system of monotheism, as Moses has long been heralded as he who introduced monotheism to the world. Islam, on the other hand, is little more than a revisionist Judaism, since the Quran is based chiefly on a perversion of the Old Testament. Indeed, it is safe to say that, if not for Muhammad's familiarity with the Bible, Islam would likely have been polytheistic. And since evolution came out of a Christian culture, it too is little more than a substandard version of its biblical predecessor. Evolution and Islam are, quite simply, anti-Christ religions born from Christian cultures. Therefore, since Christianity is the fulfillment of Judaism, we can claim with conviction that there is ultimately only a single, fully original, monotheistic system worldwide. That would be Christianity, which comes out of Judaism. With such rarity as monotheism, it does indeed seem that humanity is not up to the task of dreaming up a deity who meets all the criteria for monotheism, at least not without the assistance of some cultural predecessor. Before I further discuss polytheistic religions, I need to clarify what makes the pseudoscience of evolution to be regarded as a religious myth. Such a claim cannot be just glossed over. Unfortunately, too many people cling to the idea of evolution, regardless of how much evidence is presented against it. Let's start with a brief discussion of the meager evidence that is used to support evolution, beginning with a statement by young Earth creationist Henry M. Morris in 1981. Quote, "In all their polemics, the anti-creationists invariably avoid discussing the actual scientific evidence for evolution. If there were any such evidence, they could easily settle the whole conflict merely by presenting the evidence. Instead, they seem compelled to resort to bombastic ridicule, defamation, intimidation, and distortion." Then, as if to verify Mr. Morris's point, the atheist activist Aaron Ra has this to say about creation science. "Creationism offers no explanation whatever for anything, while evolution offers a very comprehensive and demonstrably accurate explanation for an awful lot. And evolution is universally supported by an overwhelming preponderance of objectively testable evidence from every relevant field of study, while creationism is supported by nothing whatsoever outside of frauds, falsehoods, and fallacies. There is literally nothing to it," says Aaron Ra. I don't know if Mr. Ra is uneducated or unintelligent, but given his diction and eloquence, I don't think it's fair to say that he's uneducated by any means. Regardless, his comment, while remaining bombastic ridicule, defamation, intimidation, and distortion, is largely a lie, not at all dissimilar to most of the evidence regarding evolution. As Justice Antonin Scalia has pointed out, quote, "The body of evidence supporting creation science is as strong as that supporting evolution. In fact, it may be stronger. The evidence for evolution is far less compelling than we have been led to believe. Evolution is not a scientific fact since it cannot be actually observed in a laboratory. Rather, evolution is merely a scientific theory or guess, and it's a very bad guess at that. The scientific problems with evolution are so serious that it could accurately be termed a myth." Indeed, creation science is quickly taking over the study of origins for anyone who cares to listen, even skeptically, to the scientists in the field. And we're not talking about creation in general, but young Earth creation specifically. Every day, more and more of the foundation for evolution is being washed away by the catastrophic worldwide flood of research, evidence, and practical examination of findings regarding young Earth science. Despite evolution being deluged by funding and support from universities and pseudo-scientific societies, most of the evidence still being used to support evolution has been long since debunked, even though you can still find those same, already discredited ideas cited in school textbooks. The famous Nebraska Man, for example, is more famous now, at least among critics of evolution, for being built up from a single tooth that turned out to be from an extinct pig. But the Nebraska man is still found in textbooks, cited as a hard piece of evolutionary evidence. And since Dr. Mary Schweitzer's 2005 discovery of soft tissue in T-Rex bones, researchers have also found other substances in those bones that cannot possibly be there if those bones are millions of years old. Such substances include carbon-14, collagen, and a dozen others. Finding these materials in dinosaur bones is conclusive evidence that dinosaurs are no older than 30,000 to 50,000 years old. And if that's the case, then the rest of evolution begins to crumble very quickly. It is impossible for dinosaur bones to be older than the liberal estimation of 50,000 years. But creationists do not spend much of their time discrediting evolution's evidence, as easy as that may sound. In the past 40 years or so, the field of creation science research has blossomed in ways that put it not on par with evolution research, but vastly surpassing it. And the evidence is mounting in such a way that books discussing creation research are flying onto bookstore shelves, and they fly off just as quickly into the hands of educated readers who, like Odin and his earnest desire for the wisdom and knowledge, are eager to learn the facts of the origin of the cosmos and of life itself. Even 30 years ago, very little information was available on creation science. The more frequently, more substantially funded evolutionary religion made creation look laughable, not because evolution was true, but because it had found its way into people's vision so much more often. These days, creation research is making magnificent advances and has long since surpassed its mythological counterpart. For those who want to learn about the origins of life and the universe, there are hours upon hours, books upon books, courses upon courses available to show the facts of intelligent design and the laughability of the myth of evolution, rendering that paradigm a religion, and a monotheistic one, as its foundation is born from a Christian culture. The ideas of the polytheistic pseudo-divine entities are not merely ancient or historical by any means. The same trends continue in mythologies today. I already mentioned Superman, and he too shares more with polytheism than meets the eye. Any members of Superman's race would have the same superhuman abilities of Clark Kent were they to visit Earth, so Superman is also part of a polytheistic mythology. But also consider the Star Trek character known as Q. He hails from the Q continuum, a group of these supposedly immortal, evolved, superhuman beings. Indeed, the idea that he is evolved is an outright admission that he is no more than an enhanced person, even though that enhancement is based on yet another myth. He is said to be all-powerful, yet his power is severely limited inasmuch as he must gesture to invoke his powers, which carries with it little distinction from an incantation. Ergo, Q is a glorified, and I use that term loosely, sorcerer. He must answer to authorities, and, as demonstrated in the novel Q Squared by Peter David and the TV episode True Q, he has authority over other members of the continuum, other younger immortal beings. Such a paradox there. So we are shown that these beings have beginnings, and as two of them are killed by the continuum in TNG's episode True Q, and another one commits suicide in Voyager's Death Wish, we also know that they have endings and are therefore also subject to time, not at all unlike Zeus or Odin, not unlike you or me or any other human. Any number of Star Trek all-powerful characters are endowed with the same limitations. The Dowd, the Metrons, the Thasians, the Megans, among others, some without race names, demonstrate little difference from the Q continuum. Star Trek has even made reference to Apollo of the Greco-Roman myths, adding that pantheon to the Trek universe. The prophets from the Star Trek series Deep Space Nine represent the most literarily sophisticated of these so-called immortals in the Star Trek universe, and yet, while they are theoretically not limited by time, they are ignorant of what it means to live within time, which is an interesting limitation of its own. Further, they are not omniscient regarding occurrences in time, as demonstrated in the DS9 episode The Reckoning. And, of course, they are also a polytheistic system. And when you consider the TNG character Data, we can understand that humanity, in that fanciful futuristic fiction, has indeed progressed to the level of deities, as Data is an android who is argued to be a living being in the episode Measure of a Man. Dr. Noonien Sung, with his wife, making another polytheistic religion, create, not assemble, design, construct, or even manufacture. They create Data, and Data becomes a living being. In short, as in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, humanity has achieved the power of creation. However, such a conceit is not surprising, as scientists now boast that they have created the first artificial cell. This is in scientific magazines. The claim is absurd. They've created nothing. They took part of one pre-existing cell, placed it in another pre-existing cell, and called it creation. Humanity has created nothing, either ex nihilo, out of nothing, or ab initio, from its beginning. In each case of the immortals from the Trek universe, they are all humans with magical, telekinetic, and quasi-prophetic superhuman abilities. But they all appear as humans, are rife with shortcomings, and, with the exception of the prophets that I mentioned earlier, they are all subject to time. So, the premise that man-made gods are all made in the image of humanity holds true, not only across cultures, but across time. Q might just as well be Shiva, and the prophets might just as well be the Roman pantheon. It is not my intention to rail against imagination. Were it not for my imagination, I would not be a writer, a musician, an actor, or a teacher. Indeed, when telling interviewers how he invented his famous theory of relativity, Albert Einstein said that he used his imagination, to the great disappointment of his fellow mathematicians and other scientists who wanted to hear about his mathematical processes, his theorems and experiments, his struggles over formulae and successes with equations. Unfortunately for them, Einstein reported that he merely imagined what he would see if he departed at the speed of light from a giant clock when that clock struck 12 noon. Assuming that he could continue to see the clock at any distance, he realized that he would always see the clock standing at noon because he'd be traveling away from the clock at the same speed that the light from that clock is moving away. And if he were to move away from the clock faster than the speed of light, he would see the clock moving backwards because he would be traveling away from the clock at a greater speed than that of the light from the clock. And lest we forget, the Bible declares that the God of the Bible created humanity in his own image. If so, let us consider the first thing God does in the Bible. He creates. In the beginning, God created, is how it opens. If the God of the Bible is a creator, and if that creator made humanity in his image, then he must expect us to be creative, like he is. And being creative requires us to use our imaginations. Ergo, part of being created in God's image means that we must necessarily be imaginative, regardless of individual expertise. Human imagination is a powerful tool, but it is not without its limitations. Humans cannot imagine things outside of their experience. For example, try to imagine a primary color that is not red, yellow, or blue, the only primary colors. It is outside of human experience and is therefore impossible for us to imagine. very much like the God of the Bible. Regardless of how powerful and vivid the human imagination may be, the God of the Bible defies it. He cannot be imagined. Humanity is incapable of inventing such a being. The consistency and frequency of the anthropomorphic gods of polytheism make that point plain. People do not create, and I submit they cannot create, monotheism. It is beyond the capabilities of human beings. People create monotheism, atheism, or some composite system such as evolution. But humanity does not possess the capability of inventing monotheism, if only because monotheism doesn't appeal to the human ego. It doesn't look like humanity, therefore it cannot be. And certainly the God of the Bible is far beyond human imagining. Given that there is actually only one monotheistic deity, it is easy to conclude that the God of the Bible is the real McCoy. However, if the original monotheism is not proof enough for the average person on his own, let us compare the polytheistic anthropomorphized gods of various cultures with the God of the Bible. And that will be in part 2, which will come up in probably a week or two, something of that nature. I'm doing 3 different channels, and so I just don't know what my schedule is for them. In the next section of this, part 2 of this article, I will talk about the God of the Bible in every context that I have talked about these man-made gods. So I will talk about his relationship with time, his authority, his monotheism, everything that I've talked about with the polytheistic gods, I will talk about in the next section in reference to the God of the Bible. So that's what you have to look forward to. I do hope you enjoyed this episode. Please, I would appreciate it very much if you would click the like button and subscribe to this channel. That would help me a great deal. I also ask that you share this video with unbelievers or believers, either way. Let's help strengthen each other in this hour near the end. And I ask that you have a blessed day. I encourage you to listen to some good sermons from good pastors who preach the gospel and who understand the gospel and who know God's word thoroughly. I recommend John MacArthur, Vodi Bakum, Josh MacArthur. Thank you very much. If you have questions or comments, concerns, criticisms, make sure you go ahead and write them in the comments. I want you to keep the comments respectful, though. If I find one that's not respectful or that uses foul language, I will simply delete it as soon as I see it. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your attention in this video. I do hope it has blessed you. Take care, and we'll see you next time.